Oh, thank you all for joining us today. When there's a, it's not quite like I can say when you have all these wonderful things you could be out doing, because we're all here together and we're missing being together at the museum and having coffee and all the great hors d'oeuvres that all the new members bring in. This will be a chance to be together for us. Now, every year for 17 years, I've gone off to England to work for a British film company, for production. And I do not ride around in this costume or my husband's antique Bentley, but you can see that we are actually quite Anglophiles. And my husband bought this car. It was an old car at the time, even when he was in college, and has had it since then. For a while, we kept it in England and we'd go over for Ascot. And here we are at Runnymede, where the Magna Carta was written, which is sort of an interesting thing to think about the Magna Carta when we think about our Constitution in this day and age. And it's also a great car to go and visit gardens in, because you can drive to the front door in it. Now, the Chelsea Flower Show sells out in something like, well, I guess a couple weeks. The gala sells out in 24 hours. But the Royal Horticulture Society, which I'll most of the time refer to as the RHS, is the sponsor of the show. They share the proceeds from the show with the various other charities that actually sponsor gardens. The gardens at the show cost a lot of money to produce, and we're talking usually about $600,000. When it's all said and done, you'll see the plant material, you'll see the staff, the people that work on them, getting them all to London, keeping them in London for 2 weeks, usually in advance of the opening of the show, when they set up the gardens. Now, I was fortunate enough to work for, as I said, a British film company, and I started out, I was basically the coffee girl, even though I was also the oldest person on any of the teams. But by the end of my 17 years, I was promoted to being on what's called the Royal Rota, which meant that my cameraman and I were allowed to follow the Queen. Most people, cameramen, are not. But it meant I had to walk backwards everywhere because we couldn't turn our back on the Queen. And we wanted to film her coming at us forward, which is, you always want your person in the camera's view to be looking their best. Now, what I did was our film company had about 20 teams that would go for the first maybe week before the show. And then by that time, the gardens and stuff was beginning to come. There was things that you could film, and we would go around and film different things. We had, very tight schedules. We had very definite schedules on who we were filming and who we were interviewing and all of these things, because our video was sold the morning that the show opened. And it meant a lot of people that came to the show had friends at home that hadn't been able to come, for one, get tickets, or the tickets were very expensive. They run about $100 a ticket. They're cheaper times that you can come. The first 2 days are for the Royal Horticulture Society members, all 550,000 of them. So since the show only sells tickets for the whole show of 168,000, you can see there's a lot of people that miss it. And so we would film the video, and it would be every night that would go, our film would, all 10 crews films that they took during the day would be taken back to the edit suite, and they would be edited. And so that the last day, everything was finally put together, and then in that morning, they would start selling the souvenir video. Oh, and then it became the DVD, but it was a video. And television, people in England, that is a country of gardeners. And I think everybody in England has a green thumb, and they love to watch camera on camera gardens, and gardens are basically eye candy, and the presenters become like pop stars in England. And these are my two cameramen that I always worked with. These guys were absolutely wonderful, besides carrying these heavy cameras around. And these cameras, by the way, had their own little raincoats, because not always was the weather quite as nice, or were we able to film in that great pavilion. But Paul and William were always, you know, it's very nice to be able to work with young people, is all I can say. Now, this is the grounds of the Royal Hospital. In the back, you see the red brick building was designed by Christopher Wren. And they take about 11 acres of the hospital ground, and they set up the Chelsea Flower Show. The main pavilion is the center, which allows for a lot of the smaller displays, and it means that they're not out in the rain. And the big show gardens are all built around the edge of the pavilion, as well as now they've added what they call artisan gardens and courtyard gardens, because not everybody has a huge amount of property to build something of the scale or the cost of the gardens that you see in the show. Now, the Brits love garden parties. They love gardens. Here we see a picture during the Victorian times when Queen Victoria, who's riding in the carriage around with all the people. This is a tea party at Buckingham Palace. And they love tea parties. They still have tea parties at Buckingham Palace. You can see the wonderful little hors d'oeuvres that are offered at the gala at opening night. But the tradition of going out and looking at gardens and learning about horticulture, once again, up in the upper right-hand corner, we have Queen Victoria out in the Highlands of Scotland, probably. You know, they're having their tea. Nothing stops the Brits from having their tea time. But they are also, you know, seriously collecting plant material, studying plant material, as well as just joining nature. And we are familiar with the British tea time from Downton Abbey. There's the Dowager Countess, or the Dowager Duchess. And one of the things that I've discovered in my research about British tea parties is that they used to be quite, the things they put in their tea and brewed, they used Bermansia, which is a form of datura, or it's the new name for datura, and it's a hallucinogenic. So their tea parties, I'm sure, got very interesting, to say the least. Now, the food of lava, food in the garden, in the outside, carries over, and here we have, you know, pop cooking star Jamie Oliver making pizza in one of the gardens that had a pizza oven. And since then, my son has built a pizza oven in our backyard. Now, the Chelsea Flower Show, after press day and all they do the judging in the morning, and the press come, and the sponsors of the gardens, most of the gardens are sponsored by insurance companies, magazines, cosmetic companies. And so there's a lot of stars, movie stars that come. And it's all very elegant and wonderful, and there is a lot of champagne. Now, at this point, we're going to turn over the screen over to Christopher, who has so kindly joined me to help do this technical problems for all of us, because Karen and Janine and I have been really working very hard. Karen and Janine have just been heroes, and Christopher has come in, and you know, he's our IT guru, and I think you all realize you'll get to see Christopher, I believe next week, is going to give a chat on how to really master Zoom. But Christopher is now going to take Q&As about, he's going, I guess I'll let Christopher tell you what he's going to ask you. And go ahead, Christopher.
So everyone, when we did a practice for this presentation, Janine and I, sorry Janine for giving you the shout out and sharing our secret, but it both made us crave a glass of champagne. So we had a question for all of you that would be fun. If we were all at the Chelsea Garden Show together, would you rather have some champagne and lobster, or would you rather have some tea with strawberries and cream? You can just message in the chat box, and then we just for fun to see what the majority is, and I will tally them up. And if only 2 people say something, then they're the winners. But definitely puts me in the mind for some lobster and champagne myself. The other question we have for all of you, has anyone been to the Chelsea before? And if so, just say yes or no in the chat box. We're just kind of curious if people have been. Ooh, some people have already started sharing their thoughts. Champagne for me, but definitely strawberries with cream sounds good. And then a little bit, I told Natasha I would share a little bit about my favorite garden. I grew up on the East Coast, and it snows a lot there. And where I'm from, it's very common to have rock gardens. And at Chelsea, you can see a lot of different kinds of gardens, even rock gardens. And it's really beautiful because in the winter, when the snow is several feet in the air, you can still see the tips of the rocks in just a little bit. And then in the summer, beautiful flowers surrounding them. Natasha, I hope to be able to join you at Chelsea next time, and then I can be in your show. And I promised I'll buy a whole new wardrobe if I have the honor of being invited. But back to Natasha. So I'll tally up these results. So thank you.
Well, I think I'm back on now. Is that right? Can you hear? You can hear me. Good. Christopher shakes his head.
Perfect. Perfect.
And we move on to these slides that we have here just for Christopher, because this is a picture of the Best in Show garden or it was a gold, which is the ultimate award you can receive from the Royal Horticulture Society, is a gold medal every year at the show. They do give that. It's not only one person gets it. One person gets Best in Show, but anybody that deserves a gold will get a gold medal. And what I love, what they say in this little brochure, it says, visit or ask Mr. Wood for advice, because you will save endless expense and disappointment. And rock gardens at the first, this is the first show that was done at the Royal Embankment and on such a large scale. The Royal Horticulture Society had had smaller shows in advance, but that so many people kept coming that they moved it down to the sort of heart of London. And we sort of, like they say, if you build it, they will come, and they most certainly did. Now, another very interesting thing about these early gardens were that men, professional horticulture, the world of professional horticulture was really run by men. Ladies could have gardens and gardeners. They could do gardening at home, but they most certainly would not be, in a large estate garden or in a royal garden or in a park garden, be out there in the public working in the fields, as it were. They worked in agriculture, but they didn't. Horticulture wasn't for women. And so, except for, the few exceptions of the, upper class ladies, but then they would have usually a gardener that would carry out their orders. And in fact, frequently at Chelsea, even today, people come with their gardener to the flower show, so they can point out to the gardener what things that they like. And also, all the plant material that you see in the Great Pavilion is purchasable by order from these exhibitors. Now, this is an example of Christopher's favorite flowers, which I know are roses. He likes blue roses, but this year we didn't have blue roses. And this is David Austin's exhibits from 2 different years, and he is sort of one of the great British hybridizers, because the Brits do take their horticulture seriously. And what my fantasy would be after this is all said and done, down in the bottom right-hand corner, you see arriving at Chelsea, a huge truck filled with David Austin roses. Well, I would like that to drive up to Christopher's front door and say, thank you for all of your help to all of us at the auxiliary getting our technology put together. Now, the nation follows the queen. She sets the tone, she sets the style, she sets everything. And so the Royal Horticulture Society, actually it's called the Royal Horticulture Society because the royals sponsor it. And there's also a great interest in children and bringing children into the world of horticulture, teaching them about plants, about caring for the planet, caring for the environment. It's the future. And so we have the Queen and children. One better, we have a garden at Chelsea that is designed by the future Queen, the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate, a children's wild garden. And here we have the little, actually we have two future kings of England in this picture, but little Prince George and Princess Charlotte are, paddling their little feet in the running water. And so there've also been other, Prince Charles frequently has exhibited or sponsored gardens at Chelsea, wildflower meadow gardens one year, an oriental garden another year. And then recently, the garden that won Best in Show was presented by or sponsored by Prince Harry, and it was a fundraising garden for a charity, a children's charity in Africa. And so the royals do get involved with these gardens, as well as making it, sort of a thing that, because gardening is also very style oriented. Now here, we are starting to see the themes that go on in these gardens. Fortnum and Mason sponsored a garden, and there are 3 beautiful beehives because they believe in pollinators and realizing how important they are to the future of our food supply. And so gardeners are encouraged to have beehives. And these beehives will be moved to the top of Fortnum and Mason's store in London. And the bees will probably be able to go over to all the gardens at Buckingham Palace to collect their honey. And so it would be wonderful to buy some Fortnum and Mason honey next time you're in London buying tea. The first year that I went to Chelsea, this was the typical garden, or this was the garden. Of course, Chanel was the sponsor, and Chanel, everybody loves Chanel. And I had to put this quote from Coco Chanel saying, "Elegance is refusal." And here they've refused a lot of things. There are little white foxgloves, or I should say big white foxgloves. There's a lot of white plant material. But basically, we're talking about the hornbeam trees that are growing into an arch, and this boxwood. Now, there are 4,000 boxwood plants making up the parterre in the foreground of the garden. And how this was done, when you apply for a garden, they let you know a year in advance. You do have to give tell them what you're going to do and why you're going to do it and what your principles are and your morals and your, all of these kinds of things and what you want your garden to show people. And so here, so you do know. And so once the designer of this garden, Tom Stewart Smith, received the okay to go ahead with it, this garden was planted in a greenhouse. And all these 4,000 boxwood plants in the parterre grew, as you see them here, but they were planted in 40 metal trays. and they were pruned and clipped and pruned and clipped and fed. And so it looked just like this. And then to come to Chelsea, they loaded up the 40 metal trays, and there were these were growing, and then they brought them to Chelsea and put them down here like a jigsaw puzzle, fluffed up the plant material, and voila, you have a beautiful, beautiful parterre. The Medici Venus, which is almost a little over the top, was is now at Stowe in the Temple, and the Chelsea or the designer offered to, if they could borrow it, because it's a copy, they would gild it gold. And so Stowe, which is a beautiful estate garden in England, said, yes, of course you may borrow it. Thank you for gilding our statue in gold. Now we're moving into a little bit more exuberance in plant material. But once again, this is sort of very esoteric. If you notice the irises growing on the right-hand side, the brown irises, how many of you have seen brown irises before? I think I never had before that year. I think they were bred specially for the show, or they were, the designer of this garden was visiting another nursery in Belgium that belongs to Piet Olaf, who I think we've all heard of. He did the plant material at the High Line in New York and a lot of public gardens in the United States. And the designer saw these and he said, oh, I have to have them for my garden at Chelsea. And the grower said, okay. But then it set the style for brown plant material for the next year. Now this garden was based, the moral behind this garden was the 3 periods of Virgil's life. And there were Latin inscriptions written around the garden. But there's usually always a, you know, once again, message that goes with these gardens, because there's more than just the plant material. There's layer upon layer upon layer. Just as at Bouquets d'Art, we have the beautiful flower arrangements, and they reflect the paintings, and there's a story behind the painting. There's a message. And so the flower arranger is also trying to bring that message to all of the viewers. And that's one of the great joys of Bouquets d'Art, are the messages that we bring to the thousands and thousands of people that come to our bouquets. And even this year, to virtual Bouquets of Art, I think there were 53,000 visitors that just came to the virtual one. I mean, it's just quite amazing. Now, the work that goes into presenting these, remember, this is just open grass with a lot of major big trees around, you know, 2 weeks before the show starts, and you bring in your hedges and you bring in your clipped hedges, and which are probably also grown very similar to those, the boxwood we saw in the Chanel garden, that they are planted and they are budded up in a greenhouse and then clipped and in numerical order put back into creating a hedge, so that you can just sort of fluff them up and clip a bit more. On the top, you see they just have left them grow wild, which is something, you know, this is a historical reference. This is what they did in French gardens in the you know, the time of Louis XIV. There would be the clipped hedges underneath, and then the fluffier, and then the trees above. Now, you can see the detail, the work that goes in these gardens. All of the people are wearing their little in-the-house booties over their shoes. They are down on their hands and knees, like Lenora Helmsley, scrubbing the limestone path, and with paintbrushes. And then if you notice this garden on the right, remember, this has only been there almost just 2 weeks. And look at the density of the plant material here in the large slide. And then you can also see the work going in, the exactness that's required there's our brown irises up there, the exactness that's required to install these gardens and the work that goes into it. Now, my cameraman and I get exhausted because we usually start filming about 5 in the morning. And so we get hungry. And the food during the mock-ups for the show, when the show is being put together, is not champagne and lobsters. It is bacon sandwiches. And so here we are indulging. The army marches on its stomach. The Royal Horticulture Society is trying to teach people about all of the wonderful things that go on in the gardening world. And if you want to have an allium of a certain shade or a certain color, these are the opportunities that you have. And you can go and talk to the grower about how he makes his alliums look like this, and you can then order plants from his nursery. The same way with vegetables. These are all peppers in the background, and these is a sort of church window shaped things. The leeks on the right-hand side, these are real growing vegetables, or they were just growing. And once again, you can order, I looked at his website last night, and you can order blue parsnips, blue. There's the world of horticulture is just beyond amazing. Now, this shows you one of the reasons why it's so nice to go to the gala is because you can walk through the gardens with a glass of champagne, which I wish we could walk through the galleries at Bouquets to Art with a glass of champagne. But at Chelsea, you can walk through the gardens. Only at the gala. Only at the gala, not during the rest of the time, because there are so many people. It also means that if people are going to be walking through the gardens, you can't hide anything behind anything. It's always everything, every little detail is on show. Now, Christopher is going to come on and tell us what he has learned from our poll.
Sorry, I was on mute. I unmuted myself. So even technical people can forget to do things. Wow, what a great presentation. I really love the photos, and I love the celebrities. From our poll, we did have one rogue participant who put in Aperol Spritz. So I threw that one out. We know who you are, Janine. But the overall winner for what people would like right now would be some lobster and champagne. So that sounds quite delicious. And this looks like a spectacular event, so I'm sure they do have delicious lobster and champagne. So Natasha, are you ready to take a few questions?
Oh, no, I'm not quite through. I only stopped to get you to tell us what people were having.
No, just
how many have been
just
to
a quick question for you. Yeah.
How many have been to Chelsea?
Hello.
Oh, can Christopher tell us how many have been to Chelsea?
So no one put anything in the chat boxes, but someone before said one. So I'm guessing at least 2 people, but I'm sure after your presentation, Natasha, I think we'll have a much higher result once people are able to travel again.
Maybe that would be a good outing for the auxiliary, is to go on a trip to Chelsea. Now,
I'll put in a good word with Janine.
Back to gardening, back to the gardens. Once again, in all of these gardens, which are, the plant material is unbelievably wonderful. And they also show you that it's the mental health. The gardening is important for your physical health, your mental health. And so usually having water is something that is advisable in a garden, and also a nice little place to stop and rest and enjoy your garden, to have a quiet moment, to have a meditation moment. It also protects you from the elements, be it sun or rain. Now here This is an interesting garden because there are no flowers in it. So you can have a garden that's all green. I think that there will be flowers later on when these water lilies bloom in here. But once again, we see the water and you sit in this little pavilion of sorts, out of the sun, out of the rain, and enjoy your garden when you're not busy digging in it, which I think you have to do a lot of digging. Or you can just go back to sort of shabby chic, filled with exuberant plants, and sit on a nice little sort of bench that's starting to rust and enjoy your garden. Now, this shows a group of people, and I also, getting back to the idea of men and women in gardening, these are the judges, or a group of the judges, which are sort of a very exalted group. And that's Bunny Guinness in the green jacket giving me sort of a dirty look, because the judges do not like to be photographed judging gardens because they raise their hand and they don't want the designer of the garden to think they have not voted or voted against or for their gardens. And so it's photographing the judges is not encouraged, but I couldn't resist. Now, this is an interesting garden because the gardens frequently are sponsored by other charities. And this was sponsored by the Cancer Research Charity. And the bent oak sculpture that goes through the garden, uniting the garden, is meant to suggest that if we all work together, we can cure cancer. And so there is a message here again. One of the things that the Royal Horticulture Society is really emphatic about, strongly emphatic about, is sustainability. And this has gone a little beyond. The wall around the garden has been built out of reused scaffolding. Instead of trellises for the plants growing up, we have high-tech green glass trellises that aren't really trellises, but they are protecting our solar panels. And the solar panels will then provide the electricity for the garden lights, for the water, pumping the water through the garden.
Well, good to see you.
Somebody needs to mute themselves. Well, I guess they aren't going to mute themselves, so I will just speak as loudly as I can. And so for pure delight, we move on to the bonsai displays. And what could be more beautiful than this azalea, this miniaturized azalea plant, other than the little teeny plant, and I don't even know what this plant is next to it, but whatever it is terribly darling. And it doesn't have a label, the azalea does. So if your delight is orchids and waterfalls and tropical gardens, that's great. I have to, it's when I see these palm trees, and these aren't even big palm trees, mentioned that not everybody has been too sustainable or too conscious about their carbon footprint when they built this garden, because one of the gardens was sponsored by a sheikh from Abu Dhabi, and he brought palm trees from his garden in Abu Dhabi. He flew them to Chelsea in his private jet. And actually one of our teams went down to Abu Dhabi and filmed them being loaded in. But I think that now we're all getting more conscious about where the things we eat, what we, where they come from. What is the carbon footprint? Or you can look at these lovely peonies over at the right. The plant material, once again, is incredible. The little paracels are not meant to be there forever. They're there to keep the plants from coming into bloom before the show opens. Or you can just be wandering around looking for ideas to how to create a meditation yoga garden like the one on the very bottom. This is a garden sponsored by Perrier Champagne. Laurent Perrier, and it is a very sort of traditional grand garden. And one thing I must say that isn't always fair, the plant material at Chelsea is forced for the show or kept back from blooming for the show. And so frequently you see plants that would never be growing at the same time, growing in full bloom and full exuberance in front of you at the show. But it's, you know, it's fantasy, so we all enjoy it. And children are brought to the Chelsea Flowers Show to enjoy it from very young, early ages. And this looks like maybe a school group came. I'm not sure, but there are exhibits for children specifically that are set up around the show grounds, because once again, they want children to learn to love horticulture. Now, I was mentioning that there are star gardeners, and Dermot Gavin is one of the star gardeners. And he's on television in several different series. And so the garden below is a beautiful traditional English green garden with white flowering plant material, clipped beautifully. But his sort of main part to enjoy the garden is you get it. This is if you have a huge crane that can lift you up. He built a pod that was raised up over the garden, and you can sit there and have your own drone view. You can escape the world up there, basically. It's just fantasy, of course, but it's good fun. And so this garden was so successful that the following year he built the garden on the right-hand side of your screen. And these gentlemen in their red coats are the Chelsea pensioners that live at the Chelsea Hospital. It's like a VA hospital, basically, only for this event, they put on their super formal red uniforms, and the RHS had said, no, visitors can't go up in this garden. This is a 80-foot high garden, and it's about 7 stories high. And the Chelsea pensioners said, oh, we are strong soldiers of the empire. Of course we can go stand up there for a photo op, and there they are. One of the critics said, though, this is a mega garden for a man with a mega ego, which I had to laugh at. The designer is a friend of mine, and he's actually very generous with his time, giving lectures to various and sundriest groups. He came to New York and lectured for the British Memorial Garden. Now, on the right-hand side, these are details of the different levels of this mega tower garden, because he said, you know, we're not going to be able to have everybody have a little house and a little garden and a little plot of land. We need to go upward. And here's Paul, my cameraman, filming the gardens at one of the levels. You can see they've got lovely roses growing there in the garden. There's a Victorian greenhouse. There's a swing. And the strange thing that looks like a big, huge snake here is a tube. And so if you need to leave the house quickly, you can just slide down there. I actually did. It was something I would never do again. But he also put in an Airstream trailer up on one of the levels. So he had a little place to live. And then above that, he had a outdoor shower, because he said it's so wonderful getting out in nature, and everybody should have an outdoor shower in their backyard. And I can almost agree with him, except it's kind of cold in San Francisco. Now, getting back to real life, or you know, more of a real garden. Here we have the British green grass. We have the boxwood balls that are clipped not in circles, but they're sort of egg-shaped, and the pleached hornbeam in the background and the cut hedges. Or if that was too plain, have lots of flowers. I noticed that these garden seats are all socially distanced from each other. I'm not quite sure what that was all about at the time. And then once again, you see along the edge, there's a little walkway underneath the plant material that will keep you out of the rain or out of the sunshine. And this is something that you see in historic gardens all the time. And so we remember our history. Now, I've also mentioned about the quiet moments that you can spend in the garden. This is a meditation pavilion, and you can sit there and listen to the water in your stream. The water also is a very handy thing in an urban situation because it blocks out the noise. And since we're 85% water, our bodies like to be in tune with water. And I've heard that you can sense water, humans can sense water from something like 95 feet away if you really think about it. And that's how dowsers find water. Now, here we are, California forever. This is Fitzer's biodynamic vineyards. They're up in Marin County. And what they have done, they got a goal for this, of course, is the water is pumped by a windmill. There are all these wildflowers growing that keep pests away. They provide a home for wildlife. You see the bird houses that have more birds that will eat the pests. Everything is done very conscientiously about being sustainable beyond being organic. Now we're coming to the close, and this is my favorite garden. It was done by an Italian gardener who came to England, studied his gardening at the Itchbald School, I believe, and then at Wesley or Kew, and went on to open his own landscape business. But he does go up to Great Dixter, Christopher Lloyd's garden, and he got the head gardener at Great Dixter to plant these beautiful lupin beds. Now, one of the things that we see here, it's interesting, he does have some green grass because British gardens, you know, they're renowned for their garden grass, but getting rid of the grass, which needs water, needs fertilizer, he has a lot of just plain soil. You can see the plants there. Now, fantasy. This was the ultimate fantasy. It was the garden. It's made out of plasticine, which is like a mixture of Play-Doh and plastic. And all of these little flowers and plants were made by school groups, by veterans groups. That was all volunteer work that made this garden, and it was a resounding success, even though it wasn't real flowers. They had to give it a special prize because it didn't qualify for flowers. But you notice here, the British picnic right there under the tree, and the tree is blooming. It's in the 4 seasons, so it's blooming, it's fruiting, the leaves are turning, and then you just have the winter branches. And so that might be where we're all going to be if we don't get serious, because we're not going to go to Mars along with Elon Musk, as much as he'd like to take us there. This is a space station garden in fantasy that the astronauts, when they set up camp, would have a little garden with a thermal hot spring, and then they would plant some of this. But we do now know that there is no water on Mars. So we're not going to Mars. We're not going to join Ringo Starr in the octopus's garden underneath the sea. We've got to think outside the box, and here someone has suggested we could have garden sculpture that would support a whole urban oasis. That this sculpture not only is used to run all these greenhouses to provide water, it could provide power for a whole village. And these are kinds of things that we have to start thinking about. We have to start taking care of our plants that we have now, just as these irises have been wrapped and lovingly tied, waiting for them or keeping them from blooming too soon because it's so warm. We should think about that. We should think about our trees and how we're going to protect them, how we're going to take care of them, and all of the fungus that now we're learning grows in the soil underneath the trees and joins the forest and joins us to the world of plants. Now, as I said, there were 550,000 members of the Royal Horticulture Society. And this year, since they weren't able to come to Chelsea, the Royal Horticulture Society said, well, we're not stopping. Everybody send us a picture of your garden and we will choose the best garden. And this was the members' garden of the year that won the prize. You see the little pavilion in the back that you can sit in. You see there are actually vegetables and herbs growing in this garden as well as plants. There's the boxwood balls that the English love to clip. There's flowers, there's green, it's all there. It's all there and it's loved. You can tell it's loved. And so gardening is what joins man to nature. I don't think that, it's man trying to control nature like they say about Vaux-le-Vicomte and the French gardens that, oh, it's just torturing nature. It's not. It's just a way man becomes part of nature. That's what he's doing in nature. And so we're joined. Now, whether it's in a garden or just going out and enjoying the plants in the forest, it's all important. It's important to think about our health, the health of the world, and that's what plants bring us. And so the Royal Horticulture Society's goal is to inspire everyone to grow. And so I would like to hope I have inspired you all to go out and think about your gardens, maybe order some seeds, maybe, do something. All the nurseries are open. You can get plant material from them very easily. And this is where I would like to be, in a little hut, very cute little hut at the foot of my garden. And I thank you all for joining me today. I thank you for all your work you've done for the auxiliary. I thank the auxiliary for doing so much to bring the love of flowers and art and the messages that we get from them to a large audience. I thank Janine and Karen for all their care of all of us during this time and trying to, to march forward positively. I thank Christopher, oh, so much for all his technical help. And I just wish you all very well. And now Christopher is going to take over and I will try to answer any questions that you might have. And if you think of questions later, you can send me an email. Christopher.
So we have time for a few questions. So I'm going to do a combination question for you to start, both relating to the gala. Have you met a celebrity at the gala that you're excited about, and do attendees wear fascinators at the gala?
No, the attendees do not wear fascinators. They wear hats during the daytime, but the fascinators don't seem to be the evening attire in London. And the one of the things that the stars, because these companies do get their stars that they sponsor, the, especially, if they wear watches or drive cars for the company and ads. So then they come to the press day and get photographed, and then the garden gets publicity. And so the stars are usually wandering around the gala, and you can go up and talk to them. I mean, you have, if you want to. I was talking to Michael Caine, who I do love. I guess that dates me. And he said, oh, I come to Chelsea every single year because I'm always searching for the impossible. I said, oh, oh, how nice. And he said, if you're going to ever find anything, you'll find it at Chelsea.
Wow, I think that all makes us want to go to Chelsea even more. We might even try to buy a ticket now. Another question from the audience is, how and when did you become so passionate about nature and flowers?
I became passionate about nature and flowers in the beginning through, sort of more as an intellectual exercise. I'm a landscape designer, and so I love studying historical gardens. And I think that gardens, there's a garden wants to be. And one of the stories that I love the most is Russell Page, who was, a great landscape designer, maybe in about the 40s, 50s, was hired to design a garden around, with basically a new garden for an old villa, an old Italian villa that had gone to ruin. The garden had been ruined. Somebody had bought it, some superstar had bought it and wanted to restore the villa and restore the garden. And Russell Page, granted, didn't know his history about what garden design was like in the time that that villa was occupied and built. And so he was sensitive to that, but he most certainly put his own stamp on his design, and he designed a garden. And when they started to install the garden, they dug away all the old stuff, that, the layers of soil and old dead plants and everything. They discovered that the original garden, the layouts of the paths, the stairs, everything was basically in the same place that Russell Page had designed it. And, it's like they said, this is what the garden wanted to be. And a sensitive person goes in. It's just like, I think if we go in the woods now and they're talking about forest bathing, and you walk in the woods and you can talk to the plants and you can listen to the plants. And if you quiet yourself down in nature, nature talks to you. It's a great solace in this time, especially. And so that's how I basically got into horticulture, from the intellectual design point, and then I learned to love my plants in some much more than others.